Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I feel like I'm Aerosmith or something. There's this huge spotlight right there. So we're here today to talk about diversity in open source and provide a few example case studies on how we can help that. Most of the content we're going to be talking about is going to be about women in open source because that's sort of our background, but a lot of these same techniques can be used to increase diversity no matter what you're aiming for. So minority diversities, all kinds of different stuff.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's thinking about it.
Joint keynotes. They're always
Hold on,
fun.
let's see here. Computer.
Huh. So this will be the slide that we'll be looking at for the remainder of the presentation.
Let's see if...
That's weird.
1 second. Do you want to introduce yourself? Well,
Sure, yeah. So my name is Angie Byron. I go by WebChick on the internet, and I'm from the Drupal project. And in the Drupal project, my role, I have a number of different hats that I wear, but my main role is I'm a Drupal core committer, so I'm one of 6 people that can make changes to the Drupal core software itself, which is a lot of fun. And we have 1,700 developers that work on Drupal core itself and 30,000 developers that make up part of our community. So my role is to sort of cat herd those folks and make sure like this person can talk to this person if they're both working on the same thing. I also do final review on patches to make sure they conform to coding standards, that they're performant, and they have automated tests attached to them, those sort of things. And I actually got my start in open source and Drupal both through the Google Summer of Code program, which Chris DeBona, who's coming after us, he actually was the inventor of that. And thanks. It's had a profound change on my life. But before Google Summer of Code, you know, I was a huge free software advocate. I learned about it like 10 years before that. I installed Debian Linux for the first time back when it fit on 7 floppy disks. Does anyone remember? Right. It was a long time ago. I'm very old. But anyway, but it took me a decade to figure out that, I can actually contribute to open source. I don't have to just sit here on the sidelines and actually like cheer these people on. I can actually become one of them. And Google Summer Code was the instrumental thing that allowed me to kind of break a hole in my Einstein complex I had about open source. So very grateful. So thank you.
awesome. My name is Jessica Mckeller. I'm a director for the Python Software Foundation, which is the stewarding organization behind the Python programming language. I'm also an organizer for Boston Python, so the local Boston Python user group. We happen to be the largest Python user group in the world, with just over 4,000 members. I got my start in open source while I was an intern at a tech company. I found some documentation that I didn't understand in a project called Twisted, which is a Python project, and sent what was probably a really annoying email to the project mailing list saying, hey, your documentation sucks. I want to make it better. And they incredibly patiently held my hands through my first ever contribution process, and I've actually ended up being a core maintainer for that project, and I even wrote a book about it. So I guess it was good that they didn't blow me off initially. Thanks, Twisted. Great. So this morning we'd like to talk a little bit about where we are now in this ecosystem, and then a couple of actionable things based on the experiences that we've had, mostly in the Python communities and the Drupal community. And again, our experience is primarily in doing outreach to women in open source, but you're going to find that this stuff all is very generally applicable towards making communities more welcoming to people of all backgrounds.
So I'll start by talking about a little bit about why we're here. Suddenly my mic doesn't work. I think I may be out of batteries. Oh, can you hear me again? Okay, sweet. So why are we here today talking about this topic? This topic might seem a little silly to some people, or perhaps even sexist. The reason that we're here is we're trying to talk about this problem. So in the tech industry as a whole, I don't know if that comes out really great, we have roughly a 20% breakdown between women and men, people who are involved in technology. And that's not great, right? Like the population of the world is about 50-50. We're running 80. It's not ideal. We have a lot of work to do here. But fortunately for all of us, open source is a meritocracy, right? And you're not judged on anything at all other than the quality of your code and how you express yourself online and these kinds of things, right? Okay, so does anybody want to throw out a guess on what the participation rate is like in open source?
2%. Spoilers.
Spoiler alert. Oh, wah, wah. So as Worley would say yesterday, what the fuck, open source? Okay. So what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about how to solve this issue, and we'll sort of use some case studies from both of our respective projects and how we've sort of tried to tackle this. And why with this is important is because, when open source communities invest in diversity outreach, everybody wins, right? You can't achieve world domination without 50% of the population, so, let's go.
So let's get started with user groups. As I mentioned, I'm an organizer for Boston Python, and for the last 2 years, we've been running an initiative that has had a truly transformative effect on our local community. What we knew 2 years ago, so Boston Python happens to use meetup.com to organize RSVPs, so we have very good historical data on who is attending our user group events. And this excellent historical data told us that, in general, 0 to 2% of attendees at Boston Python events were women. And we decided that we wanted to do something about this. And we wanted to do this as part of the local community. We didn't want to create a new space. We were interested in changing fundamentally the Boston Python community and the broader Python community. And the way that we approach this is by starting with, is by thinking about this as a pipeline. Not as sort of one-off events, but as a pipeline for bringing more people into the community. And we started with a very lightweight, 2-day introductory workshop focusing on women and their friends in the broader tech community. So 2 years ago, we started running these weekend workshops. We've run 8 in the last 2 years for over 400 women. And what we found is shortly after starting to run the first couple, we immediately saw substantial changes in the texture of the community. Again, thanks to this excellent meetup.com data, we found that at general user group events, so not just these workshops, but at arbitrary user group events, we were seeing 15% women. So this is a pretty huge jump from 0, and it's a pretty good number. It's not 50, but it's a pretty good number as a percentage. It's also a really good number in absolute terms because Boston Python is a pretty huge organization, and so typical user group events we're having 80, 120, 140 people. So 15% of whom are women represents a significant improvement for our local community. We saw a lot of secondary effects that we maybe didn't even anticipate initially. We found that once we had these intro workshops, we needed to do something else afterwards. And we initiated these things that we call project nights, which are unstructured events. You come, you eat free pizza, and you work on whatever you want in the company of fellow Pythonistas. And this is open to the whole user group. And we had initially created these project nights as a second touch point for our beginner women, but they became incredibly popular for lots of people in the community. They're now a monthly mainstay. We run them every month. They're incredibly popular, and they've become a real opportunity for beginner and intermediate learners of diverse backgrounds to receive mentorship, sort of in-person support, debugging help, and it's really forced us to hone how good a job we do at presenting a welcoming tone and supporting these mentorship opportunities. We've written a lot of custom curricula at this point to help support what started as this initial intro workshop initiative. Thank you for advancing my slides. No worries. We've written custom content, custom little bite-sized projects for intermediate workshops. We have a custom curriculum that we've honed as a truly beginner-friendly introductory workshop with the initial Boston Python workshop. In general, we found that doing this outreach, even though the outreach was focused on getting more women into the group, dramatically impacted how we approach organizing a large user group overall. And we're doing just substantially better for it. And then a funny, against sort of secondary effect of this is, so we've had about 400 women go through this program, which is great. Prior to running these events, we were about 700 people. Once we started running these events, our population sort of exploded. And it's not just the women who are getting into the group. When you run these diversity outreach initiatives, you are sending a signal to the broader community that you value being welcoming and you value beginners. And you're going to support people with a range of experience levels. And we found that our user group size quintupled to over 4,000 to where we are now. So a real tremendous spike in growth as a consequence, as a secondary consequence of running these outreach initiatives. So if you ever want to grow an open source community, diversity outreach is a compelling way to do it. That has been our experience. So that's one anecdote from Boston Python. There are a lot of things that you and I can do as individuals to contribute to diversity outreach initiatives in user groups. And there are a lot of things that we can do as part of our companies. So you and I, let's ensure that we have sort of diverse representation in our user group leadership and in the people who are speaking at user group events. If you have a friend who is great and she doesn't think that she, has the background to do it, tell her she's wrong and get her to come. Volunteer with these outreach initiatives. Companies, we can't run these without the pizza and the space, so sponsor some of these outreach events. In general, encourage a culture of volunteerism in your corporate communities. Encourage your technical women to step up as community leaders. A lot of this is sort of soft stuff, right? A lot of it is about producing a welcoming tone and being encouraging about the people in our communities stepping up. Right. So that was user groups. Another opportunity for outreach is in conferences. And being primarily part of the Python community, I'd like to talk a little bit about Pycon. So there are a lot of Pycons regionally all over the world. The largest Pycon is in North America in March every year. And we discovered a couple of years ago that Pycon is maybe not doing so hot on a couple of axes. We found in 2011 that there was one female speaker at Pycon, so one. And this was one of many signs that maybe we need to be more proactive about getting more, not only speakers, but attendees into the pipeline for being a part of this national community. And we made a couple of changes. Pycon adopted a code of conduct. And codes of conduct can be sort of a confusing topic to discuss. Codes of conduct don't exist for the people who don't need a code of conduct. Codes of conduct exist to signal to the people who need the assurance and support that we have a clear policy about the way that we're going to act with each other at conferences. It's a very positive code of conduct. It's and again, the point is to signal to the people who need it that this is a supportive place. So Pycon implemented a code of conduct. It has a very robust financial aid program, which is really important because in general, underrepresented groups are going to skew towards first-time attendees, newer folks in the community who may need extra support. So having a robust financial aid program has been a really important part of, again, getting people into this Pycon speakership and attendee pipeline. Pycon benefits from organizations like PyLadies. PyLadies is a nonprofit that's a part of the general Python community, and they do a lot of community outreach, but in particular regarding Pycon, what they would do is run proposal brainstorming sessions and proposal writing sessions for women and for everyone in the community. So giving a really concrete opportunity for maybe first-time speakers who are unsure about the process, to have a really clear path into this pipeline. And this has had a tremendous impact, again, on sort of what the pool of applicants ends up looking like. And again, I'll reiterate that the goal here is not to have like a quota for for diverse representation. It's about getting this pipeline full of great candidates, because that's the way that you get sustainable changes in user groups and in conferences, is you get a bunch of people into the top of the pipeline and help guide them through every part of the process. And that ensures that you have an authentic, meritocratic process, but that is still supportive of underrepresented groups. So think about the pipeline. And I'm happy to report that for PyCon 2013, which happened earlier this year, so remember, one speaker, 2011, PyCon 2013, we had a record, roughly 20% speakers were women, roughly 20% of attendees were women. And this is, thank you to them. So, and PyCon keeps getting bigger as well. So again, as a percentage and as in absolute numbers, this represents tremendous progress in just a couple of years. And given that it's only been a couple of years, I think it's worth reflecting on how DrupalCon has been doing, because they've been focusing on this for a lot longer than us. Mm-hmm. They're encouraging results.
I could take it from here. Yeah, so DrupalCon, we started a bit earlier. So 2005, we had 25 attendees at our DrupalCon, one of whom was a woman. It was not me. Someone offered to fly me there, and I was like, haha, you're funny. And then they were serious. And I was like, oh, anyway. And then by 2013, we now have 3,300 attendees. So our community has sort of exploded dramatically since then. In about 2007, we actually sat down a bunch of women who were there. I think there were 12 of us at the time, and we held what we called the Inaugural Drupal Chicks, meaning sort of analogous to Linux Chicks, which is a more general group about this. And we sat down and we were like, it does feel like, like we look around and we don't see people like us. We'd like to change that, because, we all knew of very smart, awesome women out there who were working on Drupal, but they weren't coming to conferences, they weren't offering to speak, these kinds of things. So the way we handled it is we created a public forum, essentially, for Drupal Chicks to discuss this type of situation. We opened it to both women and men. And the idea was to have a safe space for sort of discussing the gender issues, women in open source, outreach to other minority groups, these kinds of things. And through that group, by about 2010 at DrupalCon San Francisco, we'd raised both the attendee and the speaker diversity to 20%, just like you guys have. So it took us longer than you, so well done. But then we sort of looked at what could we do to actually take that a little bit further, and so we also adopted a code of conduct in 2012. There's a code of conduct out there by the ADA initiative that a lot of conferences adopt. We chose not to adopt that code of conduct because when we were discussing it, we do everything in a big, messy public discussion in our community. That's just how we roll. But when we discussed that code of conduct, we found it very alienating to a lot of our community, particularly the European community. They felt like it was enforcing North American norms on them. And so what we chose to do was model our code of conduct after the Ubuntu code of conduct. And so it uses very positive language about what we expect of our attendees and why we expect that of our attendees, rather than kind of telling people what they're not allowed to do. And overall, that was really positive, and there's a link to it if you want to check it out. But yeah, basically the headings are stuff like be respectful and be collaborative and things like that. But it's more focused towards event attendance rather than just general online, sort of stuff. So I'm pleased to say that these days we pull between 25 and 30%, both speakers and attendees. So that code of conduct has definitely helped to send the message, as you were saying, that this is the kind of community we are. We welcome everybody to be involved, and if you see something that's messed up, then say something about it. And I want to applaud this conference for, Todd, thanks for saying that right up front. I mean, it means a lot to people who go to a conference where you're one of 12 people in a group of 200,000 people. You know what I mean? It really helps you to feel like you've got someone who's got your back if you do see something kind of messed up. So here's some outreach type of things that both individuals and companies can do as they relate to conferences. If you're an attendee, look for that code of conduct and don't attend events that don't have one. And if you're a company, don't sponsor events that don't have one. It's a really simple thing to do. There's many models out there for people to copy and paste from. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, but just having that sends a really strong message to people that you want to be an inclusive conference, and I think that's awesome. Also, suggest and support diverse speakers to and the program committee as well. And if you don't see that, speak up about it. If you're at a conference and it's all white guys sitting there in the keynote slots, ask like, hey, conference organizers, could you maybe, look at this and suggest, people that you've seen speak who did a great job. If you're a company, a lot of times you'll have technical women on staff. Take a look at who you're sending to conferences. If it's all guys, kind of ask yourself why that is. Because a lot of times, you send a contingent of people to an event like All Things Open or whatever it is. Make sure that there's women in your contingent who are going there, who are speaking, who are attending, that sort of stuff. And then the financial aid programs that Jessica was talking about, sponsoring those is a huge benefit. Because a lot of first-time attendees don't have the financial means to even attend as much as this conference has tried to lower the cost to entry, to lower the barriers, sometimes that's not quite enough, and so sponsoring financial aid can be really helpful. Mentoring is another aspect where, again, these are things that help everybody, not just women in open source. And the Drupal project loves mentoring. We are crazy about mentoring. So we have many different programs, but I wanted to highlight a few of them right here. One is the Drupal Dojo. And the reason I like this is because this is something anybody can do. What it is, it's a group of people who want to learn more about Drupal. And they essentially peer tutor one another. So once a month, someone will get up and do a screencast on Skype or Google Hangouts or whatever it is, just on whatever they know about Drupal. And so sometimes it's like, hey, I learned how to make a blog, which I might be able to do in 5 minutes, but maybe someone else spent 4 days trying to figure that out, and they talk about it with other people. Some people say, I learned about this new API, and here's a walkthrough of how it works. And they're very informal, just like kind of chatty type of things. But over time, we've managed to educate thousands of developers through this program, just in ad hoc sort of lesson plan type of things. We also have a more structured mentoring program, which is for core development, where we have people who go through the issue queue and sort of identify issues that are like low-hanging fruit or novice issues, and sort of like, this would make a great issue for somebody's first patch. So, I have this thing I say to the Drupal community, it's like, if you see something that's like, oh, that would take me 5 seconds to fix, so I'm not going to bother. It's like, yeah, don't bother to fix it, but make an issue about it and tag it novice, because that way we can have a list of these things. And then what happens is twice a week on IRC, the mentors go through these lists of issues and they sort of cherry pick ones to give to new contributors. So new contributors come in twice a week. They have dedicated time for 2 hours to sit down with a core developer and get whatever questions they want answered. They get an issue curated for their interest, handed to them, and it's something that makes a big impact in the project. And then at DrupalCons, what we'll do is do this live. So we have a huge room full of 200 plus people where we'll start the day with a training session on how to get a development environment set up, what Git is, what IRC is, these kinds of stuff. And then we'll take these curated issues and we'll sort of hand them out to people and walk around in green t-shirts and help people if they get stuck. And that's been really, really valuable because a lot of people, and particularly women in my observation, is they really value that real life interaction with other people as their first step. It's really hard to engage with a website with these cold set of instructions. So helping people to actually meet others from the community is a really important door. And then finally, we also have this program called Drupal Ladder. And what that is a Drupal distribution, it's called. So it's a Drupal that you download, you install, and it's got a set of like do-it-yourself, self-directed lessons in there on all of the steps that you need to do to be a core developer. So how to install Git, what a patch is, how to read the issue queue, these kinds of things. And that distribution essentially gets distributed to all of the different user groups around the world. And so they'll have nights where everyone in the user group sits down and goes through the Drupal Ladder thing and they pair program or whatever they want to do. And that's been tremendously helpful too for onboarding new people. So if you're interested in mentorship stuff, the first question is, have you thought about being a mentor? And I want to emphasize, you don't need to know a lot to be a mentor. To pick Drupal as an example, if you have installed Drupal ever, you know more than about 15,000 people in the forum that are sitting there lost because they don't know how to install Drupal. So it's just literally, if you've done anything at all in whatever project you like, you can help somebody else get over that hump. So if you are in an open source project, try and identify those things that are these would make great first patches for somebody. Try and call those things out because people will attack. I swear to God, if I make something called novice and I tag it something, it's fixed in a day. Because people will just look at that stuff and they jump all over it. So there's people out there clamoring for how to get started. Just make the entry points really, really clear. And finally, forming a dojo in your community is super easy. It doesn't take any time. Just use the tools that are already available, put it on a calendar somewhere and communicate it. And you can form your own learning group in your own community, and it's a really, really awesome thing to do. And if you're a company, give your employees time to participate in these type of mentoring initiatives. Google actually has one coming up in a couple of weeks here called Google Code-In, which is a mentoring mentoring opportunity for sort of high school kids, where if you're an open source project, you sort of find these bite-sized tasks, you give them out to high school students. A great way to get new young people into your communities. So, give employees time to work on stuff like that. And then finally, help create other funded mentorship opportunities like Google Summer of Code that can help bring new people in. So Jessica, I'll hand it back to you to talk about open source initiatives.
Sure, thanks. So there are a lot of opportunities to sort of specifically contribute to specific open source projects. So getting into the nitty-gritty on the feet details of getting patches in from new people. There are a lot of examples of this. One that I really like as a case study is called the Gnome Outreach Program. And it's been going on for a couple of years. And the model is you do a paid a paid 3-month internship, and they run them every couple of months. And the focus is on getting more women into the community. It started as just paid internships with Gnome, but the program has expanded dramatically because it's been so successful in the past couple of years. There's actually one coming up pretty soon, so yeah, look at the deadlines. It's pretty good. So this project has expanded a great deal in the last couple of years. For this upcoming round, Debian, Fedora, the Linux kernel, Mozilla, OpenStack, Wikimedia, and Zen are all participating. And I'd like to sort of call it the Linux kernel program as an outreach program in particular, because I think the Linux kernel, so their first time participating in the Gnome outreach program was this past round. And I think that it was perceived as a pretty bold choice. The Linux kernel is maybe, there's a perception that the barriers to entry to contributing to Linux are maybe higher than for other projects. And to the tremendous credit of Sarah Sharp, who is, she works on the Linux kernel pretty much full-time professionally. She was the main coordinator for the Linux kernel for this program. She said, hey, we're going to do it. She was a little bit worried about, there's a prerequisite for participating in this project, which is that you have to get a patch into the project to qualify to apply. So a precondition of being a part of the Linux kernel outreach program is submitting a patch to the Linux kernel. So that, I mean, raise your hand if you've done that before. Very good. So it's a pretty serious bar, right? Like, we're not messing around here. And there was some concern that this would, maybe no one will be able to do this and nobody will apply. Boy, was everyone wrong. The demand was incredible. In the 2-week sort of pre-application patch submission process, they got over 350 patches. Over 130 of them were merged. They ended up getting 41 applicants for 6 slots. So it was just in terms of increasing awareness about the fact that it's even possible to contribute to Linux, it had a tremendous impact. It was a catalyst for getting current maintainers to work on the new contributor documentation, first patch tutorials. As an ecosystem, I think the Linux kernel has benefited tremendously from being willing to be a part of this experiment. So, I mean, that's really pretty amazing. Gnome is just one example. There are a lot of initiatives in this space. There's a nonprofit called OpenHatch, whose whole shtick is lowering the barriers to entry to open source contribution. They have online tutorials teaching you the tools of open source contribution, and promote sort of bite-sized bugs in various projects, things like that. If for your community or programming language, there's probably an outreach initiative, and it would definitely be something to check out. So for you and me, what can we do in this space? Well, again, if we can make our open source projects, our favorite open source projects, more welcoming to contributors of all backgrounds, that will help, right? Better documentation, onboarding documentation, having these bite-sized bugs, branding that you welcome contribution. These things all absolutely make a difference. They all absolutely help. And if you could be tying back to mentors, you could be a mentor for one of these Gnome programs or for a number of these other initiatives. So if volunteering is in your veins, this is a really good opportunity. And for companies, again, the way that these Gnome internships get paid is because companies sponsor them. So see if in your company, in the domain that you care about, the open source domain that you care about, if there's an opportunity to sponsor some of this outreach. And again, give your employees the opportunity to participate, the time and the opportunity. Okay, so we covered a bunch of topics. We talked about user groups, conferences, mentoring, and specific open source initiatives in this context of women in open source, but as you've seen, pretty much everything that we've said is really general to any underrepresented group that we'd like to see increased participation from. Given all of this, I would like to issue a challenge to you all. Okay? We've talked about a lot of concrete things that you and I can do as individuals and that your companies can do as organizations. And my proposal to all of us, we're not exempt, all of us, is that we make one personal investment in open source diversity outreach in this upcoming year, and one company investment. Maybe this means that you fix up the docs for the new contributor docs for your favorite project. Maybe it means that you volunteer. Maybe it means that your company sponsors some financial aid for your favorite conference. Pick something for yourself, pick something to encourage for your company, and let's make it happen. Okay, if everyone in this room did 2 things, think about, given the numbers that we were talking about, given the relative size of the open source community, that would have a tremendous impact. So let's hold ourselves to this, okay? One personal investment, one corporate investment, and let's see what happens. And when we come back to ATO next year, let's check in on how things are going.
Because again, when open source communities invest in diversity outreach, everybody wins. So thanks.